say that everything in life is relative and that everything in life is being weighed in terms of what can and can't. With that, if I may, I would like to give the word to His Excellency President Danilo Turk. Your Excellency.
Thank you, Professor Basuni. I feel deeply honored and humbled by having been invited here to this very demanding consultation, and also for having been asked to join you here at the podium. I'm sure that people in this room, many of whom I know from literature, some of whom I know personally, some of whom I know for quite a number of years, have contributed much more to the edifice of human rights, protection of individuals, in international criminal justice and international criminal court. My experience has been slightly more modest and different and always associated with political developments. At the time when I was a young human rights activist visiting Human Rights Commission in Geneva and being excited about the first attempts to develop a mechanism, a committee to deal with human rights violations in Chile in mid-1970s. It was a highly political context in which that happened, but it produced a valuable result and an important point of departure for much of the human rights, what we call special procedures today. Later, of course, in the UN Subcommission on Prevention of Discrimination and Protection of Minorities, we have been confronted with a number of political situations which produced terrible human rights violations which the UN system at that time was not yet able to deal with adequately. And for that reason, later in the 90s, when I was in the Security Council, some of those situations became subject of work of the UN Security Council. So there has always been a very important political reason for human rights violations, and on the other hand, a very important political dimension in the effort to construct an approach that would address these violations, try to reduce them and eliminate them. Now, I'm mentioning this, Professor Basuni, because you in your introductory remarks confronted us with probably by far the most ambitious set of demands ever posed before a group of jurists dealing with the contemporary questions of human rights, criminal justice, and justice more generally. And obviously 2 days will not be a very comfortable time frame for properly addressing all these issues, let alone for finding definitive answers. But some answers might be found in the ideas that you have yourself mentioned, both in the literature that we have received in preparation of this meeting, and also in what you told us this afternoon. And I would like to focus on only one element in that picture, which I believe is very central in our thinking, and that element is national sovereignty. You mentioned that we are all in a way victims of the Westphalian system, which, as I recall correctly, your words compartmentalized humanity, humankind into organized units, and which created a certain structure which, of course, has its advantages for having given order to international community, but also produced limitations in dealing with various problems of humankind. And this is, of course, true. But I suggest that we look at the question of sovereignty again from a perspective which is not purely normative or legal. Obviously, sovereign equality is the fundamental principle of the United Nations organization. It is fundamental in what states do and how states approach issues of international law. But sovereignty is also a changing concept, something that in the actual reality of the world has been changing quite profoundly. And of course there is a vast literature of analysis and critique on all these different changes. In my opinion, one of the most important changes that have happened in the past decades can be described as a slow movement in the understanding of sovereignty from the emphasis on the right to sovereignty to the emphasis on the responsibility of sovereignty. And I suggest that in our discussions today and in the coming 2 days, we place particular attention to that phenomenon. Are states properly aware of that movement? The movement is there and it can be detected in much of what is produced in terms of international diplomatic production and legal literature. The movement certainly is there, but is it properly understood? Are all the implications clear? I think this is a question which has to be put before a group of lawyers, because we are not only technicians, we are not only engineers or architects of the edifice of international legal structures. We also have to think about these questions more generally, and sometimes we have to think about these questions in terms of the reality, the major factors of reality of international relations, which define the answers or the scope of the possible answers for a better future. And this brings me back to the aspect of politics. Oskar Schachter, a great writer, a great thinker of international law, reminded us of many things, and I'm sure we all consider ourselves to be his students one way or another. And one of his thoughts in his many writings about sovereignty was that in fact one has to be careful in how does one treat power in the context of sovereignty. Because power is often a subject of critique by lawyers who want to limit it, who want to put it in a legal framework. But then lawyers also have to understand that power, in the most fundamental meaning of that word, is also the basis upon which legal structures are created. And he said that in the context of his discussion of the role of the permanent members of the Security Council, who are often criticized for various reasons, but who have to be accepted as a realistic expression of power realities today and for the foreseeable future, and with responsibilities which are special. Here I'm tempted to make a paraphrase from a writing of a famous American writer, Francis Scott Fitzgerald, who starts his Great Gatsby. And I will paraphrase those words by saying, great powers are not like you and me, they are special. Great powers are not like most states, they are special. And they are special because they have special responsibilities. And they are also special because they experience a special kind of tragedy. Sometimes the volume of power they have is not sufficient to make things according to their will. And sometimes things go badly wrong. And this is one of the moments when we see that many things are going wrong, and that we are witnessing the first signs of search for an approach that would try to remedy what has gone very badly wrong in the recent past. I'm of course referring to the larger Middle East and to the whole question of disintegration in the space of Iraq, Syria, and more broadly, where a more collective, more responsible, sovereignty-based, but responsibility-inspired approach is being called for, and maybe even in the coming session of the General Assembly we shall see a discussion on this matter. We can also see more closely to us in Europe, in Ukraine, a development which is extremely dangerous and where efforts need to be made to come to a path of peace and to a point at which law will guide decisions and arrangements will be made for durable peace, which currently does not exist. Now, I'm tempted to go further, but you will understand that this is not a moment to elaborate on these questions in any further detail. What I wanted to say, Professor Bassiouni, is that you organized this meeting in a very timely manner. You organized it at a moment where our thinking has to be really intense. And what I would like to add, we are very grateful for your ambition level. You confronted us with very ambitious, very fundamental challenges of the world today. We are challenged to think and offer answers, and to behave not only as engineers and architects, but perhaps as responsible human beings who have something very big to say to people who take big decisions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President.